Last November, two old friends and I set off on what was supposed to be a routine hunt for bull elk deep in the Colorado wilderness. We'd done this kind of trip many times before, but nothing could have prepared us for what we encountered on that third day. I've never been one for superstition. Ghost stories and tall tales belong to drunks around campfires, not to men like us. At least, that's what I thought. But after that night, after what we saw, well, some things you just can't explain. The trip started out like any other. After a long, winding drive through the dense forest, we finally arrived at our chosen campsite, nestled in the shadow of the mountain range. The crisp November air greeted us as we stepped out of the trucks, the smell of pine and earth mixing with the distant hum of the wind. We'd made it a day early, ahead of the official start of the hunt. It gave us time to settle in, get a lay of the land, and do a little scouting before things got serious. Ethan and I were the only ones with licenses this year. Noah hadn't been lucky enough to draw one, but he wasn't about to let that stop him from tagging along. He was just happy to be out there with us, part of the tradition we'd held for years. And then there was Lily, Noah's German Shepherd. She was always a bundle of energy, and Noah insisted on bringing her along, though she was more of a companion than a hunting dog. As we set up camp, Noah hammered a metal spike deep into the ground, securing Lily's leash to it. The spike sank so deep into the hard earth that I found myself wondering how we'd ever pull it back out. I asked Noah about it, and he just grinned, his usual easygoing manner in place.
"She's strong, man,"
he said, patting Lily's head.
"If that thing's not deep enough, she'll yank it out, no problem."
Lily was the kind of dog you couldn't help but like. The moment I got close, she'd leap up, tail wagging, paws on my chest, eager for affection. I'd laugh, pushing her down, while Ethan, less amused, would grumble, "Get off, mutt," swatting her away more out of habit than real annoyance. The first 2 days passed in the usual fashion. We were up before dawn, cold biting at our fingers as we trekked through valleys and ridges. Elk were everywhere, cow elk mostly. Dozens of them, grazing in slow packs across the mountainside, but not a bull in sight. By the end of day 2, frustration gnawed at me. We'd seen so many elk, I was sure a bull should have shown itself by now. I started doubting our spots, wondering if we were too far from their usual range. Ethan stayed calm, always the steady one, certain our patience would pay off. Noah. He didn't seem to care either way. Most of his time was spent back at camp with Lily, content with the quiet, only joining us for the occasional stretch of the legs. Then came the third morning, and that's when everything changed. Late that afternoon, we finally saw a bull. It stood on a distant ridge, too far to take a shot, too far to make it worth the trouble. So, the three of us hunkered down, settling ourselves in a half-circle of fallen trees. Shadows stretched long across the earth as the last rays of sunlight clung to the tops of the trees. My breath fogged in the chilling air, and for a moment, all was quiet. Too quiet. Then, a shift in the stillness. Ethan stiffened, his eyes narrowing toward something just beyond the trees.
"You see that?"
he muttered. Following his gaze, I caught a glimpse of movement. Low, slow. A coyote, limping toward a small pond, about 250 yards off. But there was something wrong with it, even from that distance. Its motion was unnatural, like something had broken it. Ethan raised his binoculars to get a closer look, peering at the creature with a frown creasing his face.
"That coyote. It ain't right. It's got a hunch on its back like a bear. And its jaw's broken,"
he muttered, his voice strained. I reached out for the binoculars, curiosity crawling under my skin. When Ethan handed them over, I noticed his grip tighten around his rifle. I brought the glass to my eyes and focused. Damn if he wasn't right. The thing's jaw hung loose, limp like a rag doll. Its fur was strange too, matted, uneven, longer in some places as though it had been left to rot in patches. A creeping unease started to worm its way into my chest. I handed the binoculars to Noah without saying a word. He took one glance, and then he screamed.
"Shut up, Noah,"
Ethan snapped, his voice low but sharp, like the crackle of a fire about to rage.
We're in the field.
I turned to Noah, his face pale as moonlight, his lips trembling. "What did you see?" I asked, though something in my gut already knew I wouldn't like the answer. His eyes dropped to the ground.
I swear I saw Lily, but it wasn't really her. It was like a hollow version of her.
"That's not possible," I muttered, half to him, half to myself. "I saw a coyote, mangy on its last leg, no black spot on the back like Lily." My words hung in the cold air, unconvincing even to me. Ethan, clearly rattled, grumbled something under his breath as he raised his rifle.
Well, since we're not seeing anything else out here thanks to you, I'm gonna put that coyote out of its misery.
He took a shallow breath and steadied his aim. His finger squeezed the trigger, and the crack of the rifle echoed through the trees, followed by the thud of something collapsing in the distance. A clean kill, or so we thought. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, already preparing for the short hike to see what exactly we'd shot. "You probably didn't get a good look, Noah. Lily's back at camp and tethered. We'll check this thing out, and you'll see it was just your mind playing tricks." Noah brushed himself off, eyes still wide and lost.
I swear, it had her eyes, human eyes.
He swallowed hard, glancing toward the camp.
But yeah, you're right. Lily's still there. No way she could have pulled out that spike.
"Let's go then," I said, my voice carrying an edge of unease as I started down toward the place where the animal had fallen. The hike took about 20 minutes, through thickening woods, the trees tightening around us like a noose. We lost sight of the body along the way, but when we finally reached the spot, there was nothing. No corpse, just a pool of blood, thick and black, like tar oozing from the ground itself. Ethan crouched beside the blood, scratching at his head.
I shot it clean through the heart. It couldn't have just walked off, not like that.
His voice faltered, as if he was trying to convince himself more than us. Noah stood back, still pale, still shaken.
It was her. I know it.
A creeping dread wound its way through me, tightening its grip. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just some wounded animal. There was an unnatural silence in the air, and the woods around us seemed darker, as though the shadows had grown teeth. Ethan noticed a trail of black blood leading into the trees, disappearing into the thick, gnarled trunks like an invitation to something we shouldn't be part of. Without a word, he started after it, loading his rifle, his steps deliberate. "Ethan, wait!" I called, but he didn't listen. He disappeared into the dark underbrush, the snap of branches fading as he vanished from sight. Noah and I stood frozen, the silence pressing down on us like the weight of the mountains. I knelt by the blood, curiosity getting the better of me. When I touched the dark liquid, the stench hit me like a punch. Sour, rotten, something far worse than the usual scent of death. My stomach flipped, and I could feel the bile creeping up my throat, fighting the overwhelming urge to heave into the ground.
You all right?
Noah asked, his voice slightly shaky. Before I could answer, a gunshot ripped through the air, a sudden, violent crack that echoed through the woods like thunder. Noah and I snapped our heads toward the sound, hearts pounding. "Must have found it," I muttered, hand on my mouth, getting up off the grass. But before I could catch my breath, we saw Ethan. He was running, no, sprinting, through the trees, his face twisted in terror. And then I noticed, his rifle was gone.
Run!
He screamed, his voice raw with panic. I froze, disbelief flooding my mind. Ethan never ran from anything, but something was chasing him now, and it was fast. I barely had time to ask Ethan what had happened before Noah grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the truck. His grip was tight, panicked, and I didn't need any more convincing. My legs kicked into motion, my body propelled by a fear I didn't fully understand. The cold air bit at my lungs as we sprinted through the trees, the straps of my rifle digging painfully into my shoulder, but I didn't dare stop. Ethan, who never slowed for anything, was right behind us, running like hell. When we finally reached the truck, I hurled myself inside, heart pounding and breath coming in gasps. I shot a glance over my shoulder, expecting something, anything, on our tail. But the woods were eerily still, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. Ethan tumbled in after me, panting, his eyes wide with a terror I'd never seen before. The shadows felt closer, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to emerge from the darkness.
Go. Hit the gas.
He barked, slamming the door behind him. Confused but rattled by his fear, I didn't hesitate. The engine roared to life and I floored it, the tires kicking up dirt as we tore down the path toward camp. My heart pounded in my chest, and my knuckles were white on the wheel. "What did you see out there?" I finally asked, voice tight. "What made you drop your gun?" Ethan shook his head, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. His eyes were distant, like he was replaying the scene in his head, trying to make sense of it.
I don't know, man. That was no animal. I followed the blood trail, and it stopped at the base of a tree. I thought maybe it climbed the damn thing. But when I looked up,
He rambled on, but his words faded as we pulled into camp. The unease settled deeper into my gut. Something was missing. Something important. "Where's Lily?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Noah's dog should have been barking, tail wagging, eager to greet us as always. Instead, there was only a chilling silence. Noah must have felt it too, because suddenly, his scream shattered the stillness. I bolted from the truck, racing to where he stood frozen, eyes locked on the ground where Lily had been tied. The metal stake was ripped from the earth, yanked free as if it were nothing. And then I saw it. Lily wasn't just missing. She was hanging from a nearby tree, her lifeless body strung up like a grotesque trophy. Her skin was peeled back, hanging in loose, blood-soaked folds. The horror of it sent a wave of nausea crashing over me. Noah dropped to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably, his hands trembling as he reached for her. Ethan stumbled toward us, his face drained of color, breath coming in shallow gasps.
she was skinned alive.
He whispered, voice hollow and trembling.
Look at the bruising around her neck. She struggled. She was still alive when it happened.
The gravity of his words hung in the air, suffocating us as the reality of what we'd found settled in. "Shut up, Ethan," I snapped, pulling Noah close as he cradled Lily's body, his sobs raw and broken. This was beyond anything I'd ever seen, beyond anything I wanted to understand.
Skinwalker.
Ethan muttered, staring off into the trees. His voice dropped even lower, a whisper of dread.
It's a damn skinwalker.
I followed his gaze, and there, just beyond the tree line, stood something that turned my blood to ice. It resembled Lily, or at least, it wore her shape, an uncanny mimicry of the dog we knew. But its eyes, they were wrong, human, cold, empty. Its fur was sickly, patchy, with an unnatural greenish hue that seemed to gleam in the fading light. The creature's fur hung in patches, a sickly mess that looked as though it had been pulled from a dumpster. It stared at us, unblinking, its mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. It moved slightly, a jerky, unnatural motion that hinted at its true form lurking beneath the facade of Lily's body, an abomination wearing her skin, its intent as chilling as the dusk settling around us. Noah's sobs died in his throat, replaced by a stunned silence. He couldn't tear his eyes from the thing, and neither could I. Ethan's voice cut through the air, trembling but determined.
We all run to the truck on the count of 3. Leave everything. Just run.
Noah and I nodded, barely breathing. The world around us seemed to hold its breath, waiting.
3, 2, 1. Go.
We bolted. Fear fueled every step, and my heart thundered in my ears as we sprinted for the truck. I could hear the thing behind us, hear the snap of branches, the low growl echoing through the trees, feeling the weight of its gaze on my back. We dove into the truck, slamming the doors shut just as the creature lunged. The impact was immediate, violent. It struck the side of the truck with such force that the entire vehicle rocked on its wheels, nearly tipping over. My foot slammed down on the pedal, and the truck lunged forward, tires screeching against the gravel as we tore out of that cursed forest. The engine roared to life, drowning out everything else. The woods loomed behind us, dark and foreboding, but I forced my eyes forward. Every instinct screamed at me to drive faster, to put as much distance between us and whatever had hunted us through those trees. As we barreled down the winding road, the memory of that thing flickered in my mind, its grotesque form lurking just beyond the shadows. We were alive, but the threat was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting. In that moment, the only sounds were the roaring engine, the screeching tires, and the relentless pounding of our hearts. We never went back. We left the trailers and gear behind, untouched and forgotten. It wasn't worth it. Whatever roamed those woods, whatever wore Lily's skin, was still out there, and none of us were willing to give it another chance. The memories of that night haunted us, vivid and unsettling. Since then, I've avoided those woods. Just thinking about them sends a chill down my spine, and I don't mention it if I can help it. I never believed in monsters before that night. Now I know better.